Hey, it's Kathy at Art Zone. I'm going to show you our ice cream painting. In your painting kit, you will find your stencil. You'll also find a second piece to your stencil. You might find one or two daubers. We'll talk about that either way. If you have one or two, doesn't matter. And you'll find paintbrush assortment with your paint colors. We're going to start by painting the background of our picture today. On this background, I chose yellow. You'll notice that this one being on a canvas, your canvas has edges. So don't forget when you're painting to wrap that color around and get those edges. I'm actually going to be painting on paper, so I won't have to do that. So I'm going to start with my big paintbrush. I'm going to switch up the background on this one. I'm going to do orange as my background. We're going to paint the entire canvas one color first. So I'm going to load my paintbrush up. When I go to paint it, I'm going to use big brush strokes that go all the way across the canvas. I really like that brush to go all the way off before I stop. You don't want your brush to go up and down and back and forth, because in the end, that's going to cause your painting to look really messy. So keep it going back and forth. I like to go and smooth out some paint here and there. We are using acrylic paint. It's actually Apple Barrel, which you can find at any of your local stores. Because it is this particular brand, it's not a very thick paint. It's pretty thin. And with that, it's going to make us need to do multiple layers or coats for our paint to smooth out and not look streaky. So I always paint my canvas background twice when using this paint to make sure it's nice and solid. But you have to let the paint dry in between colors, in between layers, I mean. So I'm painting this whole paper orange. I'm gonna let this dry, and then I'm gonna come back through and I'm gonna paint it a second time. If I try and continue and do a second layer on top of this wet layer, a lot of times what's going to happen is it'll actually pull the paint right back off your canvas. You won't have that problem so much with paper, so I'm painting on paper, because the paper will soak the paint in a lot more than your canvas will. But if you don't go back over it a second time, a lot of times it's going to look very streaky, and you won't want that. So paint it once. You can let it dry. You can let it dry maybe 15-20 minutes. Come back to it, paint it your second time. Once again, let it dry 15 or 20 minutes. You can use a blow dryer, but if you're using a blow dryer, you do need to be careful. Don't have the blow dryer on super hot or fast. Keep it away from your painting. If you get too close, what's going to happen is that the blow dryer will cause the top layer of the paint to dry, but the bottom layer is not drying. So that's going to cause your paint to crack as it actually does dry. So take your time, especially since you're at home. Let it dry all the way. Do a second layer, let it dry, and then you'll be ready for the dots in the background. Now, my paper is already soaking in, drying it. I'm going to go ahead and move on so that you guys can see the next step. For my dots in the background, I like to choose two different colors, but you have to be careful, because if I chose red as one of my colors, it might get confusing if I add a cherry to my ice cream, because then it's going to look like cherries are floating around your ice cream, which could be fun if you want that. You could turn them into cherries. Remember, this is your painting. You can always change our design. I'm going to stick with something similar to what I have here. I'm going to use yellow and orange. No, I already did orange in my background. Yellow and pink as my dot color. So I'm going to start by taking my dauber and get some pink on it. Now you really do have to be careful with the daubers that you don't glob the paint up. See how it's kind of got a little bit of a glob there? that's gonna be too much paint. So I'll take it and I'll kind of tap it around to get some of that extra paint off. If you have a paper towel nearby, you could just tap it on that paper towel and get some of the extra paint. You don't want globs, it will cause it to smear. You can make as many dots as you want. You don't want to press down too hard because it will cause it to make another shape other than a circle, which could be fun too. I like some of my dots to be going off. I like to rock that dauber back and forth so that it gets some of the texture filled in. The dauber itself, it creates this bubbly texture, and that's okay. If you don't like it, let it dry. Then take your paintbrush, your small paintbrush, and go back over them, and it will cover up that texture. So I'm trying to randomly put dots. I like to put my dots on before I put the ice cream on, because if I were to put my ice cream on and then put my dots, what happens is you'll start to put your dots kind of around the ice cream, but you won't put any going under it. And then it'll almost look like a halo around your ice cream. So if I do my background before I add the ice cream in, it's just going to make it look more of a random pattern. I think that'll be good on my pink dots. I'm actually going to use the other side of my dauber for a slightly smaller dot, and this time I'm going to use the yellow. Now the back of the dauber, this one is a wooden handle, so I have to be careful not to get too much paint on that because it will smear everywhere. Once again, so this dot isn't very circular, which is fine. I can come back with my paintbrush and I can fix that, but I would let it dry before I do that. There, that one was better. Once again, add as many as you want. Take your time on it. When you're painting at home, you can really go a lot slower. Look and see what details you want to fix. So let these dots dry, and then come back, fix anything that you see that you want to fix, let it dry, and then you're gonna be ready to add your ice cream. I already have this step done and on a new piece of paper that's already dry so that we can keep going with our painting. I'm gonna take this over here. And now I'm ready to take my stencil. I'm gonna try and center it into my paper. Of course, if you have other ideas, maybe you're going to add words, then you want to think about how those words are going to fit on the paper, and you might move your stencil to accommodate the words, or maybe the words will go over your ice cream. You will want to secure your stencil if you can, tape them down. You don't really need to tape them a lot. Just a few pieces here and there will hold it down pretty good. So the second part of my stencil will actually keep the ice cream from getting any brown when we start to do the cone. So the first color I'm actually going to start working with is the ice cream scoop itself. And of course you can choose absolutely any color that you want. If you only have one dauber, because we are going to use a dauber first, make sure and clean that dauber out, really, really dry it before you continue using it on this next step. I've got a second dauber over here that I'm going to use. So I'm going to add my blue ice cream in. Maybe it's a bubblegum ice cream, cotton candy. I want to make sure and hold my stencil down. And I don't want to push very hard with my sponge. If I push hard, it's going to cause that paint to go right underneath my stencil. And then you'd have some fixing to do. Don't worry if your blue goes down into the cone. I'm actually going to come down into the cone a bit. because I know that the next part of my stencil, if you look close, it does have parts that go down into the cone. So I want to make sure I get that blue low enough to fill it in. If your color is not covering up the background, it's not a big deal. Let it dry. I wouldn't let it dry with the stencil on. Take the stencil off, let it dry, then realign it, put your stencil back on, and do another layer. It's simply because this paint, this acrylic paint, is a little thin, so it does that. But once you have filled in your blue, let it dry, and then we're ready to go and add your cherry right up top. You could do that with your dauber if you like, but once again, you need to make sure that that dauber is really, really dry. Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of water running down your painting. Now mine is gonna mix a little because it's not dry. I've got some blue that went into my cherry, which is fine. Easy to cover up, especially if your paint is dry. But because I want to move along, I'm gonna go ahead and add it right on top of that blue. And it might even work to look like a little bit of shading to where this blue will mix with my red and it will start to shade it. I'm gonna spin my dauber so it does that. And it kind of did it. So now there's a little bit of a color difference right here. Makes it a little lighter. I made it look a little more round, which is fun. I'm gonna switch to my smaller brush and go and do the leaf while I let my ice cream dry just a little bit more before we add more detail to it. So I'm just going to paint that leaf in. Once again, hold your stencil down so that your paint doesn't go underneath it. I try and make my brush strokes curve with the shape of that leaf. And I want the leaf to have some lights and darks also. So I'm actually going to take some yellow and add some yellow into the top of the leaf, but I'll mix it in some, not completely. And then I'll take a little bit of brown. I'm not even cleaning my brush as I'm doing this. I like all the different colors to show. And I'll go back and forth, and sometimes I'll even take some of the regular green and add it in there and get it a little more light up top and dark on the bottom. And now I'm ready to go back to my ice cream. And if you look close at this particular ice cream, you can see there is a little bit of purple mixed into that blue to play with your shading. Of course, you can do a whole lot more, completely your choice how you do that. I'm gonna switch to my bigger paintbrush. Make sure this is dry before you start. I might have some problems with mine not being dry, but I'm gonna push through. So I'm actually going to dip into my original blue, and then I will also touch some of the purple. And I'm gonna start taking some rounded strokes so that it adds a little bit of fluffing to it and a little bit of shape. So once again, I'm touching my blue, I touch my purple. I want my brush strokes to go round with that ice cream itself. And I know the ice cream comes down here and it dips down. You could do as many layers as you want. And you could leave as much of that purple showing as you like. You could keep adding it in so that it creates some shading for you. I think that's gonna work for me. I'm gonna move on to the cone. Let this dry. take the stencil off when it's drying because you don't want your stencil to dry to your canvas. But if you have a dry ice cream, then you can take your second part of your stencil and just kind of lightly put it on top, and it's going to help us get the edge down here of the cone. I'm gonna clean out my paintbrush. I'm gonna start with my light brown. When I start to come near the ice cream up here, I'm actually gonna switch and bring my brush strokes down because I don't want to drag the paint under the ice cream stencil. Once again, layers if you need to. Let it dry, take the stencil off, then put more layers on. I'm gonna take a little bit of the dark brown. I've not cleaned out my brush. I like to put a lot more dark brown at the bottom of the cone and then take it up one side. And then just kind of checkerboard it back and forth. Help it give it that waffle cone look. You can also get some more light brown by taking some yellow into it. So on this side, I might add a little bit of yellow to help it. I'll bring some more of the regular brown. This is really just a back and forth until you get it the way you want. And this works better if you have the time to let it dry and you don't keep putting more paint on it because it gets a little hard to let those layers. So then, if I take this off, I take my stencil off, I'm ready to kind of see what's going on with my painting, see if there's any spots that I needed to fix, and then do some outlining. So I'll take my smallest brush. You can outline as much as you want. You just really have to remember to barely dip that brush into whatever color it is you might be choosing. Some people like to outline with some white and some black, or maybe even go crazy and outline it with a completely different color that you even haven't used yet. I'm gonna stick with black. You know what, I haven't added my cherry stem on, so I'll go to my dark brown. Let's add that stem in. Then I'm gonna be ready. Barely get any on your paintbrush. When your brush runs out of paint, just let it go. Let it get light and fade off, then get a little bit more paint and start again. So it doesn't have to be a thick outline like you see on a cartoon. I like to sometimes have my outline not even be exactly where my objects are. In my leaf, I'm going to add its vein. If you want to add sprinkles to your ice cream, feel free to do that. Really, at this point, the ice cream is yours to finish the way you want. I chose to take my outlining down into the cone. And if you look close, I did some crisscrossing to show the texture of that waffle cone. So this painting is yours. Add what you want and have fun with it. We look forward to seeing and creating with you more at ArtZone.